leadership.
That's why we're introducing everybody to stand, so they kind of need to be here.
I know. Rhine King.
Ryan King. Yep.
Barb Shaping.
Ryan.
Right, exactly.
Okay, let's
I
start.
think
It's
So, and you guys are not using any of the slides.
No.
When they see me, they'll I think we're set. Right?
Do you want me to? Okay, you go here.
I got it.
Do we
Can we go here?
want to? How do we do this? We're going to rotate
Oh,
around,
we were talking about pulling these down as we talk.
or maybe just take them off.
Or just take them off.
I
Move them.
was just gonna lower it and step back.
Well, I told these folks that they didn't need to have theirs
Oh,
on.
okay, then we can.
Yeah,
Take 'em
let's
off?
take them off. So you don't need to have the masks on when you're speaking.
Thank you.
Are we ready?
Okay.
We need the lights lowered and.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just maybe have everybody take their
Oh my
seat.
God, so many people. Do you want to say something?
Crazy. Oh my God.
I know they're really bright. Do you want to say take your
Yeah.
seats?
If we could have everybody please take your seats, we're going to begin here shortly.
Now I wish I would have brought my phone. This is a great picture. Okay, I think we're good.
Okay, I think let's just start.
We're good.
Clap.
All right. Good morning, colleagues, and welcome to Atlanta and to the Educational Leadership Conference of 2021. My name is Danielle Parker, and I am your APTA Academy of Education ELC co-chair.
Good morning, and my name is Cindy Utley, and I am your APTA Academy of Education ELC co-chair.
Good morning, and my name is Merrill Landers, and I'm the ACAPT ELC chair. ELC is a collaborative effort of the Academy of Education, the APTA Academy of Education, and the American Council of Academic Physical Therapy, designed to excite, educate, invigorate, and facilitate discussion among all stakeholders in physical therapy education.
The success of this conference lies with our shared passion for excellence in physical therapy education, as well as the active participation of all of you. It's been a while since we've been together, so we would like to begin with a few introductions. American Council of Academic Physical Therapy President Mark Reinking and Academy of Physical Therapy Education President Pamela Levangie. Please stand and be recognized. Not sure where you're at. There's a Those of you that serve leadership roles for the Academy of Education and ACAPT, please stand and be recognized. Thank you. Those of you that are PT and PTA program directors and chairs, PT and PTA educators and faculty, please stand and be recognized.
Those of you that are directors of clinical education or academic coordinators of clinical education and residency and fellowship educators, please stand and be recognized. Those of you that are site coordinators of clinical education and those that are clinical instructors, please stand and be recognized.
Woo!
We're excited to have you here. Thank you for your passion and dedication to pursue excellence in physical therapy education.
This year's conference is titled Habits for the Development of an Impactful and Sustainable Future for All. This theme harkens back to the old 4-H motto developed in 1927 and more recently the work by Dr. William Sullivan in his 2005 book, Work and Integrity, The Crisis and Promise of Professionalism in America, and also the Excellence in Physical Therapy book that was recently published by many of our colleagues here. Within this framework, Dr. Sullivan suggests 3 main areas of development, which he called apprenticeships: habits of the head, habits of the hand, and habits of the heart. And we added the 4-H motto, habit of health. Collectively, these habits remind us of important areas we need to develop excellence in physical therapy professional education.
All ELC program information can be found online. Make sure you use the QR code to open up the program and find all educational sessions, platforms, and poster sessions, presenter information, handouts, maps, hotel floor plans, and all sorts of other things. So as a reminder, we are following CDC, State of Georgia, and hotel policies, and masks are required for all indoor events. And to get creative, you'll notice that our lanyards or wristbands are color-coded. So red means no contact is preferred, yellow means elbow or fist bumps, and green means hand fives, high shakes, and we're PTs and we like to touch, so hugs. Hugs are good. We also have black lanyards because we ran out of our green, so black is our new green. Take a quick look as you meet up with friends that we have not seen in a while to determine their level of social distancing comfort. Make sure that you wear your name tags at all times and they're clearly visible throughout the conference. We will call you out if you don't have them on.
We also encourage you to visit the exhibitors in the Grand Hall, especially during breaks and during the dedicated time each day. A light breakfast is provided, as you found out today, also on Saturday and Sunday. Also on Friday, we're going to have a celebration of the 80th anniversary for the Academy of Education. So at the 3 o'clock break, please go get your cupcake. So we're excited. So there's also evening reception on Friday with the exhibitors and a light lunch on Saturday with the exhibitors. So during the conference, show your support and use hashtag ELC 2021 in your personal social media, including LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. Be sure to tag your institution's DPT or PTA program with your posts as well. We'll track the number of posts with hashtag ELC 2021 and the university college tagged. The institution with the most total hashtag ELC 2021 posts will receive a $500 gift card from Uber Eats. Share your favorite part of the day or post your favorite quotes from the speakers. Tell us if you're an ELC first-timer and what you think about the program, or just take a selfie and share.
As program co-chairs, we thank you for the privilege of serving in this capacity. We are thankful for the many volunteers who served as peer reviewers for the educational programming abstracts and who assist with registration and platform moderation as platform moderators. Last but certainly not least, we recognize and applaud the collective efforts of an amazing team of individuals who attend to every detail of this conference. These outstanding individuals include Jamil Tadloui, Events Coordinator for ACAPT, Sherry Battle, Association Manager for the Academy, and the ACAPT and Academy Programming Committee members. Thank you. We could not have done this without you all.
Thank you all in advance for adhering to our pandemic protocols throughout the conference. We wish you a safe, healthy, and enjoyable ELC. We hope you enjoy all the conference has to offer, and especially finally being together in person with your friends and colleagues. Now we turn the mic over to Dr. Barb Shapey from PTLI to introduce our Geneva R. Johnson Forum. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think we have to give a round of applause to our co-chairs for putting this together. All right. right. My name is Barb Chapey, and as president of the Physical Therapy Learning Institute, I have the privilege of introducing and welcoming you all to this keynote address. This is our 8th annual Geneva R. Johnson Forum on Innovations in Physical Therapy Education. The forum theme for this morning is Professional Formation in Physical Therapy, Developing Habits of the Heart in Graduates. Before we really begin, I want to recognize and thank the boards for both ACAP and the Academy, because this is a collaborative effort of 3 organizations as we come together. We have a very similar vision and some very unique differences in relationship to what we are all aiming to accomplish, but our common theme is about excellence and promoting excellence in education, and we're doing very well together in our own unique areas. As many of you know, Dr. Johnson passed away last week at the age of 99. She died on October 12th, and we've had a week of celebrations and tributes to her with her family over these last couple of days. But before we actually move on to this forum, what I'd like to do is introduce Dr. Carol Davis, and she's going to share a bit of her memory and give our tribute to Jeannie.
Good morning. It's good to be here with all of you. I was a student of Geneva Johnson's at Case Western Reserve University, and I graduated in 1969. It was the first master's program, as many of you know. She went on to do many more things, and I feel very humbly grateful to be the person giving this tribute to my good friend. I suspect that each of you, each of us, would like to die feeling in our hearts that we made a difference. In reality, we all know most of us have. Our lives devoted to our profession, to research and teaching and service, touch others in memorable ways. In fact, that's what drew us to want to become physical therapists. A few, however, make the world so demonstrably better, we can safely say that their contribution was world-changing. Jodie Frost, among many who gave recognition in emails when they heard of Geneva's passing. Jodie Frost, the past director of education at APTA, had this to say in her email. As so many have stated, she was a giant and a legend within our profession who has touched the lives and hearts of countless within the physical therapy profession. Her passion, her commitment, and vision will long live within those whom she mentored. She taught, she coached, and touched for generations, past and yet to come. As we well know, never underestimate the power of one who can change the lives of many and a profession, as Jeannie was that unique power of one who clearly practiced what she believed her entire life. She will always be remembered by so many with stories to be shared today and in the future. Geneva Johnson saw further down the path than any of us. She had a strong faith, built both on uncertainty and uncertainty. She trusted herself, she trusted God, she trusted us, and she loved us. And she convinced us that we could find our important place in the world if we would just dream big and do the work. She refused to let physical therapy or our lives be defined by our self-imagined limitations. Jeannie left us in the late afternoon of last Tuesday, October 12th. There can be joy in transition. The autumn leaves of October remind us that to everything there is a season. My knowing of Jeannie is that she would have us feel joy now as we remember our special interactions with her over the large part of her long professional career and life. So I invite you now, take a moment and think back to a time when you sat with her or spoke to her or asked her advice or listened to her advice, and solicited or not. And I'm going to ask you one more time, if you feel you have been personally touched by Geneva Johnson or one of her mentees who spoke of her and said, well, what Geneva Johnson would say, stand up now. Please stand if you've been touched by this wonderful woman and feel the gratitude that we all feel. So many of you who are standing are remembering your stories, and I hope that you'll share your stories with each other. Those of you not standing, understand that we could not let this moment go by without paying special tribute to the person who made this profession what you have come into, who helped make this profession that you have come into today so relevant in healthcare. You may sit down. Thank you. In sum, Jeannie's influence on the profession of physical therapy and physical therapist education is unprecedented. But her true mark will always be felt in the hearts and minds of us whom she touched. We are all better because she believed in us. She inspired us to be the best we could envision, or rather the best she could envision. She embodied heartfelt, wholehearted excellence. Her love for us and for our profession will live on as she would desire, indeed as she would expect. We all carry her with us in our hearts and in our activities when we are contributing a little bit more than we thought we had it in us to raise the bar of physical therapy practice, research, and education. Jeannie wants us to disrupt the status quo. She wants us to dream and to reach for what may seem to be, at first, impossible heights. But with diligence, effort, cooperation, and commitment, we will prevail in her memory. So, remember that smile. Rest in peace, beloved mentor, guide, teacher, and friend. Thank you.
As we've heard, Jeannie has been an inspiration for many of us for over 70 years in this profession. And she and her dear friend, Linda Woodruff, co-founded the Physical Therapy Learning Institute in 1991. They together decided that we needed a think tank to really bring leaders, both current and emerging leaders, together with the idea that we would always challenge the status quo. And our intention and our goal, led by Jeannie, was the fact that we really wanted to see how we could lead change, with her being the impetus behind those innovations and those ideas. The Institute has three main flagship activities that are in honor of our two co-founders. So this forum is our first for the GRJ Forum that will continue. And as we said, unlike many people who have lecture series named after them, Jeannie was able to spend the last 7 years with us. I think the last time we had her with us was in 2017. And she got up on this podium and decided she was going to tell us what we needed to do. So those of you that were here for that, you knew I was trying really hard to just say, okay, it's time to finish, but she continued to talk, and that's just the way it was. So we will remember those days and those fond memories as we move forward to continue her legacy and the legacy of her dear friend Linda. We have Linda D. Woodruff DEI lecture series because Linda's passion was about improving inclusiveness and diversity within our profession. So there are a number of activities that we host in relationship to that. And then the last, as a current board, we like to be disruptors. And so we do have a spring disruptive summit that looks at areas that you all have identified as things that we should be discussing, talking about, and moving to action. So check out our website about those different events and join us whenever you can. So the forum. This is unlike other types of lecture series that we have in the profession, because what we're hoping to do is to develop a safe place for dialogue. This is a time where we're going to come together and we're going to hear wonderful ideas today. And our intention is, after we hear those ideas, how do we serve as an incubator so that we can then drive the change and move the ideas into actions? So we're really hoping that we will collectively come up with new plans and new ideas after we hear from our keynote and our Ignite speakers this morning. The way this forum works, is it is really two parts. So our first part will include our keynote address and 3 Ignite presentations that are 5 minutes apiece from different representatives within our organization. We will take a break for a half hour and join the exhibitors, and then we'll come back into this room at 10:30. And at that point, our keynote will be joined by 3 panelists who are known in our profession for this area of research, practice, and education as well. We'll begin to have a dialogue, and they will have conversation, but it's also most likely going to be the time where the audience can interact with Dr. Piemonte, and we'll do questions and answers during that session as well. And that'll be moderated by Caroline. Before I leave the stage, I want to do special thanks to 2 of our board members who have generously funded and provided costs for us to be able to host this particular forum, and that's Beth Whitehead and the Whitehead Family Foundation, and Steve Tepper and Rehab Essentials. So thanks to both of them. One last logistic is in an extension of Linda Woodruff's idea and passion related to diversity, I suspect many of you have also heard that we will not be hosting the APTA Gala for Minority Scholarships this year. That usually is Saturday night of this conference. So instead, the National Association of Black Physical Therapists are holding a block party tonight, and we are going to be one of their co-sponsors to support that effort for them to bring us all together so that we can celebrate and raise money for minority scholarships for both students, faculty, and clinicians. So if you have not already registered for that event, please do so. You can go to our Physical Therapy Learning Institute website, and we have this block party event there, and you will go on and hit the Eventbrite, register. If you're not going to be able to join us, I'm sure they would appreciate your donation, so please join them this evening in this particular event. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Dr. Gail Jensen to come up and introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. Gail.
Thanks, Barb. What a privilege it is for me to say a few words about Dr. Nicole Piemonte. Yeah, you're in for a real treat here. I know her pretty well, and she's incredible. Let me give you some traditional comments, and then I'm going to say a few things to make her, I don't know, not embarrassed, but certainly to see what you're in for. She's currently the assistant dean at Creighton University in our School of Medicine. Also an assistant professor, but that won't be for long because I wrote her a tenure letter just a few months ago. But as an assistant professor, she also holds the Peaky Nash Carpenter Endowed Chair in Medicine, and she was recruited to Creighton, to the School of Medicine, really for her work in the medical humanities. She holds a PhD in medical humanities from the University of Texas at Galveston. She's not a card-carrying health professional, but let me tell you, she knows a lot about the health professions, and you'll hear that in her talk. She's one of the most engaged and collaborative scholars I know. Her expertise in medical humanities is making transformative change in our School of Medicine and across our health sciences. She came to Creighton having just published her book, which was really her dissertation, Afflicted, How Vulnerability Can Heal Medical Education and Practice. Anyone who's interested in qualitative research, there's a chapter in that book that is the most understandable chapter on qualitative methods and phenomenology. It's very good. Her second book, Death and Dying, was just published in September. She publishes broadly across journals and does conference presentations, including keynotes like this one. Currently, she's leading a study that explores the cultivation of empathy and compassion in medical students with a revised medical education curriculum. Most of all, she's an exceptional teacher. To watch her facilitate an online discussion during the pandemic with over 150 medical students is incredible. Her ability to present key concepts and engage students in a discussion that is respectful and engaging and passion is amazing. She's a gifted teacher. She recognizes every student. She's received the Golden Apple Award, and she'll certainly have many of them more to come. Her teaching materials are carefully crafted with evidence of clinical relevance and engages the student. She has key theoretical concepts and a strong focus on professional formation. She developed a Beyond Medicine group for medical students to provide informal mentoring for students in their professional journeys. And she's also very active in the community, serving on ethics committees for Hospice of the Valley, Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force, and the Clinical Pastoral Education Advisory Board. I'm going to read just a brief narrative that I wrote. She published an essay in the Journal of Humanities in Rehabilitation. And in this essay, Dr. Nicole Piemonte shares her journey and lived experience that undergirds her research, teaching, and writing. She skillfully paints a portrait of why we need the integration of the humanities in all our professions, health professions. This essay provides us with a window into her writing, which is passionate and compelling. She integrates key concepts from philosophy into the analysis of the work of health professions with both clarity and grace. Reading this essay, it's in the Journal of Humanities and Rehab, will make you want to be a student in her class. So she is making transformative change, I think, for all of us, not just medicine, but across the health professions. Her passion and enthusiasm for teaching, learning, research, and scholarship is a gift for all of us. So further ado, let me introduce you to Dr. Nicole Piemonte.
Wow, Gail. Thank you for the most generous introduction ever. I have so much gratitude to be able to work with Gail all the time. I just love her and respect her, and so thank you so much. Before I start, I lost my voice last week, and it just came back. So we're going to see if this is going to hold. So please forgive me if I don't make it through fully, but I'm here for this. So I also want to say that I'm really grateful that we can be together. I'm going to be talking a lot today about connection to each other and being together. So I think it sets the tone that we can safely be together today. And I want to take a moment to acknowledge how special that is. So before I start, I want to mention that I work at Creighton University School of Medicine in Phoenix. Gail is in Omaha and I'm in Phoenix, and it's a Jesuit institution. I've been there for about 5 years. And it has been so exciting to see the connections between Jesuit education, which I was not familiar with, and the medical humanities. I think we share a lot in common. So I wanted to share this quote from a Jesuit priest, Colvin Bach, because it really undergirds the way that I approach teaching and scholarship and speaking to other people. So Reverend Colvin Bach says, students in the course of their formation must let the gritty reality of this world into their lives so they can learn to feel it, think about it critically, respond to its suffering, and engage it constructively. I deeply believe this, and I deeply believe this about healthcare. Healthcare is the gritty reality of being in the world, and we don't do a good job preparing our future healthcare practitioners to face it, to reflect on it, to engage it critically, and then do something about it in the world. And this is what Jesuit education is about, and this is, in my view, which I'll talk about in a bit, what the health humanities or medical humanities are about. And I deeply believe this to my core. So some things we're gonna think through together today, and I mean this, that I would like to think through together with you, and especially at the fireside chat, because I'm here to learn from you as well. And you are the experts in your field. And these are a couple of things that I've been thinking about, but that I would like to learn more from you. So what does it mean to have heart in healthcare? Really, what does that mean? Does everyone need this quality, or do we need some who are expert technicians? How is this quality related at all to a sustainable career in physical therapy? And how or whether can we cultivate heart? Is it teachable? That's a $100,000 question I'm always asking myself. Is empathy, compassion, connection teachable? So those are some things we're going to think through this morning. So the first thing I want to say is that having heart is not a soft skill. Oh, I'm glad you agree with me. Okay. So I guess we are done now. Thank you for having me. So having heart is not a soft skill. This is not about being nice, and it's not about having good bedside manner. Because we start to think that these soft skills are subsidiary to the hard skills, the technical skill, and the scientific thinking. And that's simply not true, because when we start to separate these things, we start to artificially bifurcate these two ways of being in medicine and in healthcare. The science on the one side and the art on the other, as if they're separable and different, and that at most of my endeavors, I'm engaging in the science of healthcare, and then I throw the art into it when I need to be nice or connect to my patient. And I don't think that's right, because when we divide these two things, we end up in this really silly situation where we think we have to choose between being technically skilled and being compassionate. I hear this a lot with my surgeon colleagues. I'll hear patients say that I'd rather have a surgeon who's technically skilled than one who's got good bedside manner, is compassionate. I understand that. Surgery is high risk, but why not both? These are not an either-or situation, and in fact, the good surgeon is also the compassionate surgeon who wants to do right by you because she has compassion for you. So one of the first people to talk about this was Francis Peabody. He was a physician scientist in the late 20th century, or in the early 20th century, who actually yesterday, 95 years ago yesterday, he gave a talk at Harvard Medical School. So he went to Harvard undergrad and then later to Harvard Medical School. And in October of 1926, he was invited to give a lecture to the Harvard Medical School class on the care of the patient. And at this time, so when he turned in his early 40s, he started having some distressing GI symptoms. And for 2 years, he was seeing his own physicians who said that he was simply experiencing stress or a nervous condition. And it took 2 years before they diagnosed him with a malignant tumor that later became terminal gastric cancer. And when he was dying of terminal cancer, he gave this talk to the Harvard Medical School class, which a year later, the year he died in 1927, they published it as an article in JAMA. So in that lecture, he says this famous quote that you might have heard: "The secret of the care of the patient is in caring for the patient." We've probably all heard this, and it comes from Peabody. And on its face, we look at this and say, that sounds about right. We got to care for our patients. But few people go back to the lecture and really look at what was Peabody talking about? What was the context in which he was speaking? So one of the first things he says is that the art of medicine and the science of medicine are not antagonistic, but supplementary to each other. They're always already connected, serving one another, and they don't defy each other. He then goes on to say something really compelling and interesting. In all your patients whose symptoms are of functional origin, the whole problem of diagnosis and treatment depends on your insight into the patient's character and personal life. This, coming from a researcher, clinician, grounded in the sciences, says, I can only diagnose and treat my patient well if I have insight into their character and personal life, the context of what's going on with them. Was a provocative thing to say during this time where science was having its heyday. So what he's saying here is that the best clinicians connect with their patients in order to discern what is the matter with them, and now what do I do? In order to know this is what's wrong with my patient, and here's the next best steps, I have to connect to them. So good treatment plans require knowing, or at least acknowledging, what I would call the life world of the patient in front of me. I believe that everyone in this room intuitively knows this. So if you have a patient with low back pain who is non-compliant, and we know that that word is very problematic, so we're not going to use it anymore, but you've got a non-compliant patient who's not following through with your treatment plan, and you've given them a lot of load-bearing exercises to do, and they're just not doing them. But you've listened to your patient, and you know that his issue with low back pain is frustrating to him because he babysits his 3-year-old granddaughter during the week, and he's frustrated that he can't get down on her level and play with her or pick her up. And you say, well, that's why we're doing these exercises. This is why the treatment plan is there, so you can strengthen those muscles and you're going to be able to play with her. When we connect to that meaning, we might see that the patient's more willing to engage in the treatment plan. But you would have listened to him to know that that's why the treatment matters to him. So if you're connecting your treatment plan to meaning, why does it matter for him? This meaning is only discerned through connection and authentic listening, which I believe are the hard skills required for effective treatment. You cannot design your treatment plan without connection and authentic listening. They're not soft skills. This is what makes you a good diagnostician and a good clinician. So it's also important to note that good care often involves, as you know, intuition, gut feeling, drawing on your own personal experience of maybe your own injury or illness. That being fully human is what composes good care. So in this way, to me, the heart informs the head and leads your hands. It's the hard skill. So instead of looking then at healthcare as this artificial divide between the science and the art, what we really see is that healthcare integrates the art and the science. It's an amalgamation of these two things that creates what I would say is a third space of practice, where they're inextricably connected together, and there is no artificial divide, but you're always already engaging in the art and the science all the time. I want to return to Peabody for just another moment. So he ends his lecture by saying the good physician, and here we're going to talk about all clinicians and all practitioners, knows their patients through and through. Time, sympathy, and understanding must be lavishly dispensed, but the reward is to be found in that personal bond which forms the greatest satisfaction in the practice of medicine or healthcare. So he's no longer talking about connection making you a good diagnostician and clinician, but is pointing out here that this is what brings meaning and purpose and satisfaction to your work. He knows this. And I want to talk a moment about satisfaction and sustainability and burnout. And maybe many of us are burned out talking about burnout. But I do want to talk about it for a moment because I think Peabody was ahead of his time and really onto something here. So we have to start by asking ourselves, well, what is burnout? Often my colleagues and friends will say that burnout is caused by compassion fatigue, by connecting to suffering or connecting to patients too much, feeling too much of what they're feeling. And this might be true, and maybe particularly is true during this pandemic where there is so much suffering and needless death that you are all bearing witness to. But it's been my experience that burnout isn't caused by compassion fatigue, but rather by these kind of routinized factory-like encounters over and over and over again with patients that are part of this broken healthcare system that's based on efficiency and productivity and generating revenue and not connecting to patients. To me, that's what causes burnout, not connecting to anyone and only using your head and your hands and not being allowed to connect with the heart, which is what Peabody says will sustain you in your career. So using only your head and only your hands, only the technical skills and only the scientific objective thinking will not sustain you in a career. So really, at the base level, connection to others is what protects us against burnout. Not feeling too much, but allowing ourselves to feel and to connect is what I believe protects us against burnout. So connection then requires compassion. I want to talk about compassion because at its Latin root, compassion means co-feeling. Feeling alongside someone else. It's not pity I have for you, but it's feeling what you're feeling. And not to say you can feel exactly what other people are feeling. We don't want to co-opt other people's experience, but it's feeling alongside another person. Here's Martha Nussbaum, one of my favorite philosophers, and I love this picture of her from The New Yorker. So she's a moral philosopher who focuses on Aristotle. And in her book, Cultivating Humanity, she says, compassion requires a sense of one's own vulnerability to misfortune. To respond with compassion, I must be willing to entertain the thought that this suffering person might be me. That this patient in front of me could be me at any moment. I could have a life-altering illness or injury just like this person in front of me. I am finite and fragile and precarious, just like this person in front of me. So she goes on to say that this I will be unlikely to do if I'm convinced that I am above the ordinary lot and no ill can befall me. So let's take a closer look at that. I can't do this if I think I am above the ordinary lot, that I am invulnerable, and this happens to patients and never to me. So compassion requires humility, that I am just like this person in front of me. I could be them at any moment. That could be me. It also requires vulnerability, accepting the fragility of our bodies. And because of this, humility and vulnerability, compassion isn't a skill to be learned, but it's a way of being, a posture to the world, an openness that we are shared in our brokenness and our finitude. Its ability to see our own potential for suffering. And because of this, compassion is scary. We want to turn from compassion because compassion requires me to look at things I'd rather forget. So Arthur Frank is a medical sociologist who had a heart attack at 39 and then a cancer diagnosis the following year, and he wrote an incredible illness memoir, At the Will of the Body. And in that book, he says, voices of patients can be hard for clinicians to hear because they bespeak conditions of embodiment that most of us would rather forget our own vulnerability to. He goes on to say, when the body breaks down, so does the life. And you have seen this over and over and over again. That after a devastating stroke or a TBI, that person's identity, who they were, their whole world is shifted, collapsed, sometimes gone, because we are embodied. And we'd rather not stare that in the face, because that means we have the potential for it too. So it is my view that the science of healthcare is a place for us to hide. Approaching someone's body as a biological breakdown that I can intervene on, and looking at the mechanics of the body and staying in that space is protective. So I think some of the epistemology, what we know and how we know it and how we think we ought to know these things, the whole epistemology of healthcare is sometimes developed in response to this fear. So I only have to train students to think technically to approach the body because that's safer and feels better. I know you all are master educators and you know that that's not actually what's going on, but I think there's a temptation there, and I respect that temptation. And the science is important, but it can be a hiding place if we stay there for too long. And I think we construct all sorts of things around that fear of being vulnerable. So Frank says there's consequences to this. He says that objective talk, that scientific, technical way of thinking, that objective talk about disease is always medical talk. Patients quickly learn to express themselves in these terms. But in using medical expressions, ill persons lose themselves. The body I experience cannot be reduced to the body someone else measures. My body is my life, and it can't be simply measured. So in much of my work, I've been thinking about that fear that I was just articulating as being a fear of something to happen in the future, my potential for suffering in the future. But I've been thinking lately that maybe it's more than that, and that patient suffering can sometimes remind us of our current or past woundedness. That when we're faced with others' suffering, we turn from that woundedness, maybe our previous traumas or our own painful pasts and our own disappointments. That it's not just a reminder of my potential for suffering, but a reminder of my current suffering. And it's hard to look at that. And I think patient suffering can remind us of our own. So Stanford psychiatrist Dr. Anna Lemke, some of you might have heard of her. She just published a book on the opioid crisis. She's an addiction specialist, and she says, our patients can see through us, right? We bring ourselves to the practice. I think it's helpful for patients to know that we are all broken and we all struggle. Being smart and being highly educated is not any protection against addiction. It might even make you more vulnerable because you think that you'll know when you've crossed the line because you're smart enough. She says, clinicians are all the same regular people with all the same regular problems. But the shame can be more pronounced because you're supposed to be this healer who's got it all together. I think that we need to help our students see and our trainees see that they share the same brokenness. So that humility I was talking about, they share that with their patients. Their white coat doesn't make them better. They share that brokenness. It turns out, however, we are really, really bad at this. Really bad at this. We are bad at helping healthcare professionals, our colleagues, and our trainees acknowledge their shared brokenness. I'm trying to do this a bit, Gail knows, in the School of Medicine, maybe to the chagrin of my students, but I'm trying, but it's swimming upstream. And those of you who are trying, you're swimming upstream with me, right? So we know about the hidden curriculum, and in medical school, it's pretty significant. So John Tyler Allen in The Atlantic says, while medical schools may include lessons on things like listening, fostering trust, compassion, tacitly, students are learning the value of objectivity, detachment, wariness, and distrust of emotions. That's what they learn on the wards. When they start entering their clinicals, all that stuff we talked about in the classroom, it's kind of out the window. It's hard to cultivate these things. And I think we try to approach it in this idea of like, oh, we'll do professionalism education. Professionalism is not the same as compassion. It doesn't even touch vulnerability. We're not asking our trainees to say, what did it feel like to be with that person? What did it feel like to be in the presence of so much suffering, or joy, or beauty? Instead, we're asking them to be professional, which sometimes actually adds to an air of detachment. I'm the professional, and you're the patient. So what this means is I tend to agree, really, really, really agree, Gail. I very much agree with my colleagues like Dr. Gail Jensen, and many of whom are probably in this room, that in your National Study of Excellence and Innovation in Physical Therapist Education, in part 2, where these recommendations are made of this is what's missing in PT education, and this is what we need to do. This recommendation is the song of my heart. Develop a strong sense of the moral foundations that underpin and are inseparable from practice in all physical therapists, so that they demonstrate a full understanding of the meaning of being part of this profession. The moral dimensions of patient-centered care permeate practice, yes they do, and thus must be explicit and deeply embedded in the professional curriculum. That we have to start being honest, that healthcare has just as much to do with their hearts as it does their heads. Let's be honest about that, because they figure it out. They start practicing and they're like, I didn't expect to see so much suffering. And then we just never told them. So if Nussbaum, if she's right, that compassion requires some amount of vulnerability, and vulnerability is scary, is there a way for us to safely and responsibly cultivate this or teach this with each other and with our healthcare trainees? So I always make a joke that all I have to do is make my medical students suffer, and then they will understand. My job is to make them suffer. Of course, that is a joke. But there's some truth to that. So those of us in this room who have suffered, we know what happens. So when I was a young college student, when I was 20, my mom was diagnosed with late-stage ovarian cancer, and I took care of her for 2.5 years until she died. And 3 years ago, I helped take care of my dad as he was dying of stomach cancer. And while I would do anything to have my parents back, because it was some of the most painful experiences of my life, I know that it broke me open. And that I understand compassion more deeply because of that suffering than other people. And those of you who've suffered similarly know that to be true as well. But what happens when I have brand new medical students, many of whom are 22, who just finished undergrad and may not have had these experiences? Some of them have, but it's rare. And if compassion might be cultivated from suffering, how can we teach these things if they haven't had those lived experiences? Now, I am definitely biased given my background in the humanities, in healthcare humanities, but I do think this is what gives them these experiences without them having to live through them in real life. So we can take philosophy and literature, religion and theater and the arts, and think through healthcare to offer them these experiences. So here's my definition of the health humanities, and hopefully it captures what my colleagues in the health humanities would agree with, because I kind of just came up with it myself. So this is my definition of the health humanities: that it is a field that gathers together the wisdom and the insight of many disciplines. So literature, philosophy, religion, history, art, gender studies, social sciences, and beyond, to foster a richer understanding of the human experience, not the scientific experience, of illness, health, ability and disability, identity, gender, embodiment, and healthcare. And that the humanities underscore the fact that medicine and healthcare is always laden with existential questions. Those existential questions are always just around the corner. About the meaning of life and death, that healthcare is inherently interpersonal, and that illness and suffering are about more than pathophysiology, more than biological breakdown and dysfunction, that it's always more than just that. That's what we believe in the health humanities. So Arno Kumagai, a colleague of mine, he is an endocrinologist, so he needs science, he loves science, but he is a fellow traveler in the medical humanities with me, and I think this quote gets to the core of what we're talking about. He says, "It strikes me that medicine should be the field where a poetic imagination might flourish. The constant presence of suffering, pain, loss, birth, struggle, and death, these all too human experiences and events requires a poet's grasp of language and understanding." Yes, we need the science, but that language is impoverished when it comes to being able to speak to what's really going on with the people that you're caring for. We need a richer, deeper language, and the humanities offer that. So, in some ways, then, the humanities can serve as a proxy for lived experience. Some of you are familiar with Rita Sharon. She is a physician and also an English scholar who started the narrative medicine movement. Many of you are familiar with narrative medicine. And early on in her career, she made this compelling argument that for events like bearing witness to suffering in the clinical space that might be what she says too hot to handle, that the humanities might offer handholds where we can start approaching those things from a distance. So she says, only if the incendiary events of illness were rimmed by fireproof handholds could doctors touch illness without fear for their own skin. Sturdy frames were found indeed in the humanities that enabled doctors and medical students to put their hands on that which their patients underwent in the grip of disease without themselves being annihilated. They could begin to talk about what suffering, existential suffering, looks like, world collapse, dying, if they could talk about it at the remove of a poem or a short story. She says, once doctors had experienced such empathy at the remove of imagination, perhaps it was possible for them to summon up that fearless and authentic empathy instead of, or maybe alongside, the guilty and automatic detachment in treating real patients. So this speaks to that point I was making earlier, that sometimes that detachment, I am an objective clinician, comes from that fear. And that maybe we could cultivate genuine connection with the humanities. So I want to talk a minute about what this at the remove of imagination means. At the remove of imagination. So a wonderful mentor of mine and an old school medical humanist who helped create the field, Ron Carson, talks about the moral imagination in healthcare, that it's this intellectual and emotional capacity, the head and the heart, that allows us to imagine what this person in front of me might be going through. So I like to use moral imagination sometimes instead of empathy. Empathy comes with so much baggage. What is empathy? There's all sorts of definitions. But the moral imagination, do I have the moral courage to imagine what it might be like to be this person in front of me? Requires both my head and my heart to do that. And when we educate the moral imagination, we can help our students grow into the kind of practitioners that patients need. And he says, one who knows how to listen for the storyline and hear the heartbeat of patients' lives. What's important here is Ron Carson believes we can teach, and he'll say tutor, the moral imagination. And one way of doing this is, yes, engaging with patients and reflecting on that real life experience, but also the humanities. Short stories and novels and literature and art, philosophy can educate, tutor, and cultivate the moral imagination. And this is because stories do something compelling. There's neuroscience behind this. If you guys need it, I'll send it to you. There's neuroscience behind this. So stories do something. That people don't just listen to stories. Arthur Frank, in his other book, Letting Stories Breathe, says people get caught up in them and stories get underneath our skin. They do something to us. Stories let us into the life world of someone else, whether that's a fictional story or the story of the patient right in front of me. I want to take a moment right here to talk about altruism. So altruism is kind of touted as the pinnacle virtue in healthcare, that if we're just engaged in selfless service to others, that's what it means to be the good clinician. But I think that covers over something really important. And what it covers over is that as a clinician, you receive something from the patient in front of you. If it is true that stories change us, then hearing a story of suffering or strength can change you, remind you of your own vulnerability so you can live more authentically and go home and maybe hug your kids or your dog with more intentionality, because you realize from your patients that life is finite and fragile and that we need to live with immediacy and intentionality in our own relationships. You're receiving a gift from your patient. It's a two-way street. I don't want to teach my students altruism. I want to teach them connection and compassion. This requires us to be open to reflection, to dialogue, to talking about what's going on. So Gail alluded to Beyond Medicine, where we create this experience for our medical students to say, what is happening to me, particularly in third year when I start seeing patients? Because what we tend to do is have them see something pretty traumatic and then they just go on to the next patient. No one ever talked about it. So we have to reflect and talk. It's not just listening to other stories, but telling our own stories to one another. We have to tell them to each other. So compassion doesn't require more data and statistics and training and communication skills. It requires more imagination, more vulnerability, and more courage. We're not going to teach it necessarily in the sim lab or in a didactic lecture, but through experience, reflection, and engagement with each other. So I want to leave you with a story. That is my best friend, Charlie. He's an OT. Shout out to OTs. And that is his colleague, Amanda, who's a physical therapist. And on Monday, just this past Monday, Charlie was telling me a story about him and Amanda engaging with a patient. So they had a patient in the ICU who they were told was fairly non-compliant and didn't want to engage in therapy. So they walked into her room to talk to her, and they asked her about her living situation. And it was important to understand what the living situation was, especially thinking about going to a SNF or eventually discharge. And she said that she had been living in a group home for persons with severe mental illness, but she was currently experiencing homelessness, and she had been a pedestrian and was hit by a car and had severe injuries. And while inquiring about her living situation, which was a clinical question for them, she then disclosed that she used fentanyl regularly, and that when she used fentanyl, she didn't know where she was, and so she was often finding herself walking into the road or sometimes laying down in the road, and this was the time that she got hit by a car. And as she's telling her story, she's weeping because she's got this shame and this brokenness for being addicted to fentanyl. And Charlie said they listened, and Amanda sat on the bed, and he was holding her hand, and when she was done crying, she said, "Can one of you guys get me a Pepsi? I want a Pepsi." And Charlie said, "Amanda and I are going to get you a Pepsi." And so they left the room and went to go get her a Pepsi, because they believe that is part of therapy, is getting the Pepsi, right? That's part of the work that you're doing. And as they were walking by, there was a table that they had these candy bars out for the employees, and Charlie made sure to get her a Snickers, and they brought her the Pepsi and the Snickers, and she felt seen and cared for and was ready to sit up on the side of the bed and start what they were going to be doing that day. And she said, "Are you coming back tomorrow?" The fortunate thing is that Charlie had his student with him, his OT student, Bree. And as they left the room, Amanda said to Bree, "You'll learn the technical skills. You'll learn all the science. That's not the hard part. The hard part and the most meaningful part is meeting people where they're at and connecting to them, because that's therapy, is this connection right here." And we couldn't have done the technical work without meeting her where she was at and connecting to her. And I hope that changes Bree, and she understands that that's the core of therapy, which is human connection. That's the hard skills. The heart is the hard skills. So I'll leave you with this quote. I love Arthur Frank, if you haven't noticed. He says, "Human suffering becomes bearable when we share it. When we know that someone recognizes our pain, we can let go of it. The power of recognition to reduce suffering cannot be explained, but it seems fundamental to our humanity." So it is my belief that connection to others is where compassion starts, and it's that connection to others is where true healing begins. So, thank you. I will leave that up there. Okay. I'll come back down.
Nicole, thank you so much for that um, amazing presentation. I can only see Jeannie looking down and saying, "This gal, she's got it." So thank you so much for your insights, and we're going to have more conversation about that in a little bit. All right, so now we're going to move on to our Ignite speakers, and what I would like to do is briefly introduce them this time. Thank you guys for putting that up. We're going to have 3 speakers. I'm going to introduce all 3 of them, and they will just come up in sequence. And so our first speaker will be Dr. Chad Jackson. And Chad is, he was until very recently the Director of Clinical Education at Incarnate Word and has just been promoted to Program Chair. So he'll be speaking to us from the representation of the DCE predominantly. And then we will have Natalie Weeks O'Neill. Natalie is Program Director for the Physical Therapist Assistant Program, at Pima Medical Institute in Las Vegas. And she will represent our administrator in this particular presentation. And then our last will be Dr. Sarah Blanton, who is Professor of Division of Physical Therapy in the Department of Rehabilitation Sciences at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. And Sarah is also our Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Humanities in Rehabilitation. So we will hear her perspective as well. So with that, I'm going to ask all 3 to move from one to the other, and then I'll be back.
Good morning. I've titled my response as "Having Heart is Good, but Now What?" I want to set the context, though. I'm speaking to each of you involved in clinical education, both academic and clinical. And I desire for you to walk away with some practical application to Dr. Pimani's wonderful speech. However, before we move on, I want you to take a few minutes to pause and feel. After her talk, what are you feeling? You may be asking yourself, what can I do in my clinical course to explicitly develop the habits of the heart as I prepare students for clinical practice? Or how can I best mentor students for the heart aspect of care? Or what can I do in my clinical practice to intentionally allow students to connect more, to show vulnerability, and intentionally integrate the heart dialogue through patient care? I would challenge all of us to better integrate the habits of the heart in our explicit curriculum. Whether this curriculum is lived out in our clinical practice, through our academic program, or through service learning in the community. Often, I believe we have missed opportunities to share vulnerability with our students and really to deepen their learning and their professional identity formation. To help bring this to life, here is my missing the mark story. I was 8 years into clinical practice in a regional hospital treating the lifespan. I served as the SCCE and a clinical instructor, and I had a student at the time. I was also a dad at that time for 3 kids, 5 and under. This is Derek. He was referred to me at 6 months old with the diagnosis of torticollis. I listened to his mother explain his delays and her concerns. As soon as I held him, I felt his severely low muscle tone. Inside, I was gravely concerned, but I didn't want to alarm his mother. In my uncertainty, I told his mother I was concerned about his low muscle tone and facilitated a specialist referral. She was thankful, and 3 weeks later, she called me to let me know that Derek had been diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy, and his life expectancy was 2 years or less. Both at the evaluation and after that call, I missed the mark in having dialogue with my student to express my own vulnerability, the impact that encounter had on me, and really how to best engage with Derek's family in the midst of a heavy situation. So, for us not to miss the mark, consider what you can do now to allow deeper engagement. If you are in an academic program, ask yourself, am I placing a focus on learner-centered teaching, which really focuses on the learner's needs, their skills, and their interest? If not, reflect and make some adjustments. Ask yourself, am I integrating the classroom and the clinic? One way could be you could use clinical cases, you could use simulation, you could use patients in your lab with the intention on vulnerability and connection. Ask, am I giving specific intention to our integrated clinical experiences, which we all have? Some ideas here are to have a student do a reflection in writing, following a patient encounter, and facilitate a debrief. Focus on how they are integrating their knowledge, their head, their skills, their hand, their connection, their heart. Connect this to their individual purpose. Ask, do I have a longitudinal perspective of the explicit heart curriculum? This can occur by intentionally threading throughout our curricular courses. If you're in clinical practice, ask yourself, am I engaging in patient-centered care? If not, what can you do to engage more? Ask, how would a student describe my vulnerability and connection with patients? Is your answer ideally what you want? Ask, am I surviving the week, or am I allowing myself to connect with others, which leads to joy? You are wise, and I trust you'll find a way. You can help bring learning alive for the students you mentor by, 1, facilitating the students having an authentic engagement with patients. Set the expectations, folks, and model it. Or 2, facilitate dialogue between you and the student. Give them an opportunity to openly share their feelings following an emotional patient encounter. You can also share with them what you've learned through your own vulnerabilities and the effect that it's had on you personally and professionally. In summary, as you walk away today, may you walk away with a rekindled joy in yourself and ignite joy for your colleagues and students. Thank you.
Amba washte, Daya wachignuma, Wadopana zemecha, Shaze mitawa, Inkmusnawia, Miyagiyabi, Mikushi Nelly Clark, Jehiabi, Mitugashe Hanswetsit, Jehabiyabi, Mikushi Lillian Weeks, Jehayabi, Mitugashe William Weeks, Jehiabi, Ina Diane Wetsit, Jehiabi, Ade Matoska, Jehiabi. Good day. It is good to see you. I am Nakota from the Fort Peck Tribes of Montana, and it is good to see everyone today. I would like to begin with a moment to recognize the indigenous history of the state of Georgia and to recognize the Georgia tribes of Eastern Cherokee, the Lower Muskogee Creek tribe, as the original occupants of the land that we stand on today. A land acknowledgement is a small and impactful gesture to start decolonizing our gathering spaces. Naming place aligns with our native wisdom. Many indigenous nations follow protocols before any gathering, opening with a prayer and intentions that connect us. I stand before you today proud of my heritage and encouraged to initiate land acknowledgement as a step forward for the physical therapy profession. I ask for openness while I share my response to Dr. Piamonte's eloquent speech on cultivating habits at the heart of patient care. Compassion, empathy, and vulnerability are all a part of Indigenous teachings and culture. The picture you see here is of my great-great-grandfather, Chief Hiwetsit. He was the last chief of our tribe before we were forced onto a reservation that now occupies northeastern Montana. Oops, went too fast, sorry. Go back again just so you can see. I guess not. Oh well, we're good. Okay, so thankfully, through amazing resilience, the same Nakota teachings taught to him were passed down to me in the form of oral history. The first is omagia, caring and compassion. Love and caring, concern for one another in a good way, especially for the family, the old ones, the young ones, the orphans, the sick ones, and the ones working for the people. The second teaching, another teaching, is called Odabi Unabi. Odabi Unabi means generosity, helping without expecting anything in return, giving from the heart. The last teaching that I'll share with you today that is relevant to what we just heard from Dr. Piamonte and Dr. Jackson is called Iodiwa Ikombi, which means humility. We all have a spirit. We are not better or less than any others. Those teachings are all a part of our daily life through stories and behavior modeling. It is something that is ingrained in us at a very young age. And I stand here before you today to acknowledge that this is speaking to openness, speaking to a willingness to engage and looking outside of ourselves when we bring into talking about this. BIPOC cultures infuse compassion and empathy into upbringing. Diversity, equity, and inclusion policies can impact cultural humility so that education on culture is infused into every patient encounter. PT students can learn that every conversation has meaning and words have power if you care. Storytelling is powerful and can be used as a teaching tool to talk about empathy, compassion, and patient care. Clinicians and students can recognize that each conversation is sacred, and they can learn much from their patients as they teach them. After all, everyone has a story, not just a medicine man on a mountaintop. We don't have to seek that out. We can look from amongst ourselves and from our cultural humility to reach that. Panamia, thank you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to join this panel. It's such an honor. I do think it's rather dangerous to ask someone with a southern drawl who rambles to try to speak for just 5 minutes, but I'll give it my go. Dr. Piamonte, it's like coming home. Thank you. You've made an elegant and compelling case for the importance of our habits of the heart. My objective is to offer an example of how the humanities can be a powerful tool to cultivate those habits and help us navigate our inner landscape. How do we do this when the prevailing perspective is there just isn't enough time in this already packed curricula? I'd like to challenge that assumption. In this short 5 minutes I've been given, I'd like to demonstrate how you can use poetry as a vehicle to go a little deeper, to think a little differently, and to reflect on your own inner landscape. It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. To me, this small portion of a William Carlos Williams poem captures Dr. Piamonte's message in a way, and it helps me think about it in a little different manner. We talk often of cultivating more courage in our students, and they think of it as this outward exercise to prepare them to navigate the clinic, and maybe, if we're really effective as educators, society. Yet perhaps we are dying miserably for lack of what we find within ourselves. How do we help our students navigate their inner landscape when we as educators tend to focus so outwardly on our external work? We embrace this badge of honor of busyness, take pride in our countless late night hours because we fail to create space to look deeply within. Are we afraid of what we might find there? How do we help our students navigate? So it's, I think, a way to, I looked at this poem and I thought, perhaps it's difficult to get evidence-based practice from poems, yet clinicians suffer moral injury every day for lack of what is found there. So poetry teaches clinicians how to hear differently. We slow down, we're mindful. In training, we learn to listen for information in predictable patterns, right? But when information is delivered in a poem, forms and sequences are broken up and we can hear words in new ways. Familiar data is reframed in significant and relevant perspectives. So I invite you to revisit some of Dr. Piamonte's reflections that I've arranged as if stanzas in a poem. It may be true that we have terror in the face of mortality, that we turn away any chance we get, but we also turn away from something else. We turn away from our own woundedness, our previous traumas, our painful past, our own abuse, neglect, our disappointments. Being a good clinician means you know things and you feel things. Connection is what ultimately brings meaning and purpose to one's work. Compassion requires more imagination, not more technical expertise. Reflection and dialogue are necessary to cultivate vulnerability and compassion. So anchored in our years of clinical and teaching experience, Dr. Piamonte's words resonate with us. But what do we do Monday morning to facilitate reflection and dialogue with our students? I offer up this poem as a vehicle to use as a third object, not analyzing their own experiences, but using poetry as a vehicle to get students to dive deeper, to share their perspectives of meaning of the words and connection to clinical work. Kindness. Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you held in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all this must go so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness. How you ride and ride thinking the bus will never stop. The passengers eating maize and chicken will stare out the window forever. Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must first travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive. Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows and you see the size of the cloth. Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore, only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to gaze at bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you've been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. So what phrases resonated with you and why? What clinical or personal encounter does it bring to mind? What questions do you still have? So you see, I don't need a poetry background or even more than really 5 minutes, or maybe 5.5, maybe, to use a strategy from the humanities to cultivate reflection and dialogue around vulnerability. It's difficult to get the news from poems, yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there. Thank you.
Well, thank you to this array of speakers who have shared with us a challenge. And in the spirit of this forum, what we're really looking to do is how do we challenge the status quo, and how do we move from what we're all very comfortable doing, which is to teach the science of physical therapy, and move into focusing on how do we teach at the heart. You all have done a fabulous job giving us ideas and sharing perspectives of compassion and humility and the things that we really have to really make a difference in our professional careers. We have some time, and so what I would like to do is to open the floor up to questions. I see a couple of mics on each side of the room, so if you have a question and can go to the mic, I would appreciate that particular piece. Now, up here we only have one mic, so we're going to try to do a little dance, and maybe we'll take this off and just pass the mic, I think. Yeah, there we go. We'll pass the mic around. I want to start us off with a question, which is that you're looking at a number of people who are committed to education, whether it's in the clinic or in the academic setting. But their content expertise is not in the humanities, and it's not in, which thank you very much, Nicole, for saying this is not a soft skill, to really teach from the heart and to share that so that it helps our students. What suggestion do you all have that they can leave with on Monday to feel more confident as a faculty to integrate education for the heart, to develop the heart in their content? Whether they have a musculoskeletal, thank you very much, or neuro or anything of the sort that they're supposed to be teaching tomorrow. Can someone share some perspectives? Nicole, I'm going to give it to you first. Okay.
Okay. Is this on?
No. All right, I'll trade you.
Thank you. So I've learned from my colleagues right here, right now, and so I want to say that Chad, first of all, brought up such a critical point. So I want to thank you all for saying, okay, Nicole, that was great, but let's talk about the practical realities of doing this, so thank you. And in what you said, basically, is that this is easy, in that it can just be mentorship. So stopping to say to your student what it felt like to know that this tiny boy was going to die is the humanities. So just acknowledging that you feel something at all is humanities. And Aristotle makes this argument that it's through mentorship, real mentorship, that you change someone's virtue. That's virtue development. And so that's exactly what we're talking about. And this idea of having more diversity, equity, and inclusion in the curriculum by virtue of having classmates who have a different lived experience can change my experience in that educational program is so critical. So thank you for making that point. And then Sarah, thank you for turning my words into poems. That's amazing. But that a poem is so interesting because it's truncated, it's short, just like we truncate patient stories and charts. But it's so much deeper and richer, and that you can take 5 minutes or less, and if you're brave enough to bring a poem into the clinical space, you can do that, and you do it quickly. So the humanities can be done practically and efficiently. So I want to thank my colleagues for pointing those things out. Thank you so much. Okay.
Let's start with a question.
Thank you. Thank you for that talk. My name's John Buford, and I'm from Ohio State. one of the things that I think is a balance, you know, you talk about the idea that we become very objective as clinicians and we just talk about the problem and we try not to get emotionally involved and that we need to be more human. But I think, you know, phenomenologically, if you observe the fact that this is going on, there's some reason. And I think part of the reason why people get so objective is to survive, to avoid the burnout. And I think there is such a thing as getting overly involved with our patients and getting to the point where we're going home in tears every day because we're surrounded by such deep tragedy. And I think there is such a thing as the student or the clinician becoming so emotionally engaged that they're just overwhelmed. So how do we, you know, how do we draw that line or navigate that boundary if it's not a line? To sort of help people find that balance between being appropriately compassionate without being so overly engaged that they can't take it anymore and they leave the profession.
So I'm just going to say something very briefly, and then I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues who lived through these experiences. So the tragedy is going to happen no matter what, and we cannot protect our students from that. And so it is acknowledging the tragedy instead of them carrying it with them and holding that in is what I think is going to prevent the overwhelm. Saying there is a space for me to say something about this because I saw my mentor do it. My clinical mentor did it, and I can say something about this. Because we can't protect them from the tragedy. We could try as much as we want to protect them and to hide from it, but it's always there, so we need to just say it out loud.
I would challenge the thought that do our students and do us as practitioners tilt to the side of being overly engaged or under-engaged? And I think I have 5 children, and half of them are in counseling. For good reasons, right? But what's when we talk about, when we deal with our feelings, right, we bring it out so we don't carry it home and feel a mess, right? And so I think, to your point, Nicole, it's happening. So why don't we express healthy ways to balance it?
I would also just tag off of what Dr. Piemonte just said about tragedy will happen. You know, being an indigenous person, giving a land acknowledgement, and to my knowledge, I think this is the first time our PT profession has, we've provided a space. And so to have the courage to do that in front of all of you amazing people was an act of bravery on my part, but also to acknowledge that, yes, tragedy does happen. I showed you a picture of Chief Hewett, that tragedy does happen. But how do we then incorporate resiliency, right? And how do we continue to not steer away from tragic things that happen daily in our clinic? We're all still in a pandemic. You know, I think we'll have a lot to learn going forward, and as we embrace more equitable diversity and inclusive practices, policies, and truly engaging and immersing in it, we will find the answers. I know we will. We work together. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's a great question, and we think about it a lot, right? And our students ask us a lot, and I encourage us all to just be, and to encourage our students to be compassionate and patient with ourselves. It's a lifelong skill, right? It's not like you're going to get these kids to graduate and be competent in how to balance, right? Balance is I think not a pretty poor label anyway. Integration and saying, you know what, there are going to be times I'm just going to come home and cry, and I'm going to get over-engaged and over-involved, and then there are going to be times when I'm going to be distant, and I'm thinking I need to get back in it. I need to get my heart back in it. And that's just part of life, right? And when we can sort of look at that ebb and flow and be mindful of it and recognize that it's a growth, and every day is an opportunity for growth, and empower our students to recognize it as an opportunity for growth, and that it's not a competency, but like a humility, right?
Hey, I'm Angie Henning, real quick, and this really goes along with what you all are talking about. I'm at UK Healthcare, and I'm a physical therapist on the cardiovascular service line, and I normally work with heart and lung transplant patients, but I have worked a lot with COVID ECMO patients the past couple of year and a half, however long that's been going on. But normally things ebb and flow. So tragedy ebbs and flows, comes in bursts. Then you may have a long time where it's not a problem. So, and we have students that come often and they see us having tragedy and dealing with tragedy. And I think acknowledging tragedy, acknowledging your emotions, is definitely a good thing for them to see. Them seeing you break down, seeing your colleagues come together and support you is a good thing. Seeing chaplain, seeing resources like SOAR programs that your enterprises have to help you. Seeing how you come together and have outlets, whether it's your activities, your hobbies, those things that you do for stress outlets, for your mental health. I think those things that you're sharing and teaching your students, I think those are the things that we need to really teach, and then highlight in ourselves too, that those are things that we need to have. I think the thing that we are having now is just the volume of tragedy. That sometimes that's just what is so overwhelming. And I think that right now we just need to really pull together as a community, as a healthcare community, and highlight all of those resources even more. And then again, just really teach our students that compassion and empathy really does go a long way with our patients and with our families. Many times, we as therapists are the only consistent voices that they have. We are the advocates for them many times, and we are the ones that they break down to, that they will tell us what their problems are, what their questions, their concerns are, because they feel so comfortable with us. And so I think that us being able to be somewhat vulnerable with them and to hear their vulnerability is an asset to our profession.
Thank you for sharing that. I think it's important to acknowledge that you all always do, and especially now, double duty of taking care of patients. A lot of you are still taking care of patients and teaching students and cultivating their growth. That's a lot. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of hard work. And something I want to point out is maybe this is the tipping point. So you had alluded to the fact that there's so much going on and we can model that vulnerability. And I think this is going to go two ways because of that saturation and concentration of suffering that we're seeing in this pandemic, is we will hide and bury our heads deeper because it's too painful, or we're going to start normalizing vulnerability and the way that you all are feeling. And I hope we choose the latter, but I want to recognize that this might be the moment in a lot of ways.
And I think that part of, to circle back to, it's something that you had mentioned and Gail and our colleagues mentioned, that it's important of being explicit, right? So that when you're recognizing that vulnerability, when you're thinking about whatever your self-care strategies are, when you're having these conversations, stepping back and creating, sort of orienting those students for the forest, for the trees, right? And so that they get what you're doing, naming it. That's what what I feel like is so important to help them carry this forward.
Hi, my name is Dr. Stephen Tepper. I want to just make a comment about the gentleman who was up here before me, Dr. Buford, when he said he's from Ohio State. I do believe it's the Ohio State. I do want to also make a statement, and that is in regards to the question that was asked by Dr., I believe, Chad Jackson, I think is your name, when you asked, what are you feeling? And what I want to just express is coming to this meeting, and at the first meeting, having my heartstrings plucked and feeling such pride with being in a group of mindful individuals and knowing Gail Jensen, who then introduced us to Dr. Piemonte, and what a wonderful lecture and what a wonderful way to start this, that it's just pride is what I'm feeling. And I just wanted to let you know that. So thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to say thank you for saying that, and I'm humbled and so grateful that you would even get up and say that, and that I'm
have so much gratitude to even be invited to talk to all of you. I'm not a PT, so thank you for even letting me be here. So thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Julie Tilson. I'm faculty at the University of Southern California. First, I want to say just how powerful this is, this discussion. I want to thank the speakers. And the whole time I was listening, I kept thinking about how you're talking about breaking down the barrier between the clinician and the patient, and how scary it is to be vulnerable to seeing what's happening in the patient. I think we have another barrier that all of the individuals in this room are involved in, and that's from the educator to the student. And our students have vulnerability, and they have challenges, and they make us maybe see things we don't want to see in ourselves. Especially right now, I think students and the age group we work with are having tremendous mental health issues. And that shows us we could have those ourselves. And I just encourage everyone, and then I have a question, to think about that whole talk, not about the care provider to the patient, but the educator to the student. And I'm curious if any of you all have thought about that, I imagine you have, about how we help faculty not be afraid of that compassion and connection with the student who's struggling and maybe showing them things that are hard to look at. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up in the question. It's something I'm wrestling with and thinking about what can we do in our programs. And this semester, as I've transitioned from the DCE role of program director, I'm teaching. And I'm facilitating a small group of students, and we typically start out our session by saying, how are you doing? And then having them share or myself share a story of vulnerability. And I think if we could all, I guess my challenge here would be, if we could all do that, I know we feel the pressures in clinical practice and both in teaching. We have the curriculum to get through, we have our patients to go see. Do we have time to stop and say, hey, this is the impact that situation had on me? We have to. It's that important, guys. It's when we look at knowledge, the 3 apprenticeships, as Solomon talks about, the head, the skills, our hands, and our heart. I look at it as a 3-pronged stool, right? And what does accreditation? What do we feel as folks in academic? What do we feel the pressure are? We feel the pressure we've got to teach the technical stuff. What do they test it on the MPTE? There are 8 to 10 questions on professionalism, right? It's not balanced. So I think we gravitate to that, but we have to be the change. We have to make the shift, and it doesn't have to be a big time commitment, as you pointed out.
Julie, thank you. It's good to see you. Yes, and yes. It's a critically important question. And so when I was thinking about the talk and saying, do I have the courage to sort of read a poem to a bunch of PTs and what's this going to be like? Part of what I was trying to offer up as an example is it's what they call like this third object, right? So it's we can read this poem of kindness, and I can talk about, well, what words shimmer to me? What does it pull up in my own experience? And then other students can share that. And so we're not necessarily talking about this tough experience that happened, in a patient's room, but maybe it's a way for us to sort of gradually open up together. And you can do it with art, you can do it with reading a story. But I think when it's something separate, it helps create that safe space to have that. I think another thing that's really important that I wanted to underscore in my talk is that we have to create time to do that work. It's a disciplined time to do some inner work ourselves so that we're more prepared to be present with what we see in our students. And so whether that's doing some reflective writing yourself or reading poetry, but thinking about it intentionally of how this is helping me with my own ability to self-reflect and be present with suffering. And, Naomi Shahib Nahai had mentioned that, no one ever really feels worse after writing things down. And you can write 3 sentences a day, and it makes a difference. And so small practices like that, find that practice that works with you, but thinking about it, again, explicitly, how it connects with you being an educator and how you use that to connect with your students.
Can I just say one thing? Okay, one thing very briefly. So I want you all to look at your curriculum and where professionalism is taught. I think we get hung up on it. So when I was interviewing medical students for some of my research, they said that too often professionalism feels like prestige, how to become separated from their patients. And so when we think about investing in our students, it's about cultivating them as persons and not professionals. And so, Charlie was describing to me, he said, it didn't feel very professional for me to go give employee candy bars to the patient or go get them a Pepsi. Like, I didn't learn that in my professionalism curriculum, but this is what it felt like to be a human person connecting with this other person on a personal level. So if you can go back and look at where are you teaching professionalism, and is that true cultivation of a person's character, or is that a bunch of behaviors that actually reinforce separation between patient and practitioner, and between teachers and students? Professionalism becomes punitive. They're in trouble, as opposed to sitting down and having a conversation that's about cultivating who they're becoming.
Good morning. I am Shirley Engelhardt from the University of Cincinnati. I want to first thank you all very much. There are many powerful take-home messages in what you each have shared this morning. I want to comment on the language surrounding soft skills. So I firmly believe that soft skills do not truly exist. If we refer to a student who needs remediation on their soft skills, what message does that send to that student? They're not capable of learning the easier part of becoming a part of this profession. And I think that truly damages their self-thoughts, their self-awareness. But I think what's also being shared today is in our own colleagues. If we begin beating ourselves up, this is stuff I should be able to do. This is the soft stuff. And it's truly not. So I really appreciated you sharing that soft skills truly are not what we're teaching. We need to be humans first. Our students need to see that vulnerability. Our colleagues need to see that vulnerability so that we can begin to go forward. So thank you.
Thank you for that. The soft skills, ironically, are so much more difficult to teach, learn, engage in, stand in, be with. So thank you.
And perhaps we could have a quorum just to let go of that language here and now today, right? And I also want to say, too, that when we started the Journal of Humanities and Rehabilitation, it was people oftentimes in science think of the humanities as this soft sort of area of study, and it is not, believe you me. And there is an enormous amount of rigor in this work. And so I really implore you as scientists to think about the rigor of the humanities and have respect for that, because I certainly have been humbled every day for what I don't know.
Yes. So my name is Lisa Van Hoos, University of Louisiana Monroe, and I just want to thank y'all for the invitation to transform, right? And so now we get the opportunity to respond, both acutely and chronically, to use some PT words that we like. So my comment is I love the fact that you said tragedy will occur all the time, right? That's my reminder to breathe, y'all. So, just a mindfulness tip. Just set an alarm to breathe 5 times. But I wonder if it is also an opportunity for us to change the power dynamic and recognize that maybe it is time to amplify the voices of vulnerable populations that have dealt with tragedy due to individual, societal, structural factors, because we have super users, if you want to use that term, that could lead us if we would be willing to listen, right, and to allow them to be the teachers. But that requires a change in mind shift, because as healthcare professionals, we forget that everybody is a doctor of something, right? If you go back to the root of the word, it is an expert teacher. So that person in front of you is just as much of an expert as you are. But my question to you is this: if language is basically tangible products of agreement or power, what would it take for us to change the definition of professionalism, right? Does it have to be this rigid definition? And then also, because we are so rooted and biased in science, our knee-jerk is gonna be, how do we measure these things? And so what are the pros and cons of that as people start thinking about how to implement this tomorrow or Monday morning?
Okay, so yes. First of all, so beautifully and eloquently stated all of that, so thank you for sharing that wisdom with us. Okay, so changing professionalism. We've got folks who are thinking through these things, so then they started using the term professional identity formation. Some of you are familiar with that. But, really, we're talking about character formation. I'd like to change the language to kind of moral development, moral courage, character formation, and just get rid of professionalism entirely. Sure, do my students need to, follow some rules? Sure, but that's not what I actually care about. I care about the person that they're becoming. Okay, and then you asked the question that I hate the most, which is about measuring the outcomes of all of this. Gail and I are attempting to do just that with some projects that we're doing, where we're looking at the incorporation of the humanities into our medical school curriculum, which I'm so fortunate that they asked us to incorporate it into all 4 years of medical school, and it's been amazing. So the simple answer is always qualitative research. So although we do mix methods and have some quantitative scales, but interviews with our students, they do a ton of reflective writing, so qualitatively analyzing their reflective writing. Are we doing something? Part of me wants to say I don't really care if I can measure it or not, because I just know that it's better. I know it. So just listen to me. But I get it. We have to measure it. So there are some modalities in which we can do that, and I think the real thing that we eventually want to look at is longitudinally. Does this change their encounter with patients? Could we have a cohort of students who've engaged in this way, and they are engaged maybe with their standardized patients, who then give us information about their engagement with that cohort versus a cohort where we didn't do any of this work? And then longitudinally, do we see them behave differently clinically? And then for my students, are they different kinds of residents later on? What are their patient satisfaction scores maybe? So I think there are ways to do this, but they're difficult. They require time, and they require innovative ways of thinking, but we can rhetorically use the language of folks who love data and try to give them some data, but really they should just believe me. So thank you for answering that question.
Hi, good morning. Well, thanks for the wonderful talk, first of all. I'm Nathan Brown from University of Incarnate Word in San Antonio. I'm lucky enough to work with Chad Jackson. I'm also the vice chair of CHEP, Consortium of Humanities, Ethics, and Professionalism. So if you're moved by today's talk, please join us tomorrow morning at our business meeting. The question I had specifically was about questions. So I teach, quote unquote, professionalism in our PT school. And I use humanities. And I ask students, how do you feel when you see this or when you watch this? What do you think about it? How do you feel about what you think about it? How do you feel about it? I ask all these questions about helping them to reflect on it. But do you have any advice about how to best ask questions of students to help them open up? In the same way, during an orthopedic subjective examination, we've studied what is the best way to ask questions of a patient so that they open up. So is there a way that we can ask students these questions, these reflective questions, in a way that helps them to open up and have the best possible affective growth?
Okay, thank you for that question. So I've learned a couple tricks of the trade from some colleagues who are engaged in this work, and sometimes I one time made surgeons do reflective writing. So there is something about getting them to write first and then encouraging them to not write in bullet points, because that's going to be their inclination. No bullet points. Gotta write it. And then having them read it. So there is some research about if you do actual reflective writing, when we write something happens to us where we start articulating stories that we didn't even know were there. And so sometimes getting them to jot down, and I tell them, we're gonna write for 2 minutes. They end up writing much longer. They don't know that they are, but they are. And then when it's time to get some of them to, I ask them to read those stories to each other. I've learned to stay away from some words, not you're going to share your story. I don't say share. We read that out loud. Share can make them feel uncomfortable. What do you feel sometimes can make them uncomfortable. So what do you think? But I'm still getting them to do the work that they need to do, but using language that's more approachable for them. And then making the prompts really be on, like, a prompt that works well for me is think back over the past 2 months in your rotation. What stands out to you the most? Can you write about it? And they will write about what it felt like to give chest compressions for the first time and feeling cracking ribs and how traumatized they are from that experience. Or they might write about the first baby they delivered and how beautiful and amazing it was. But if I just ask them, what stands out to you? That's a pretty benign question that leads to really profound answers. And so using very approachable language, I think, can help. So thank you for asking that question.
All right, we're coming up to the 10 o'clock hour. So again, I would like to thank our panel and Dr. Piamonte for your impressive keynote. And what we'll do is we will take a break, go into the exhibit hall. Please support our exhibitors at this point. And we will come back at 10:30 to this room. Excuse me. Yes, Carol wants to say one more thing as we're leaving.
Many of you will remember that Geneva always would say, oh, and there's one more thing. That's right. She said she'd lift up the lid of the coffin and say, there's one more thing. In 1985, Geneva took me to lunch in Chicago, and she said, Carol, you have to write a book on values for the profession. You have to write a book so that students start to recognize their feelings. 1985. And I had been doing this work at the University of Alabama, Birmingham, at Boston University, and she said, you're the one to write it. And so I did, and it became patient-practitioner interaction. It became a workbook where the students could read the evidence in the literature, and then they could journal about how it affected them. And then they'd come to class and sit in small groups and talk to each other about how that reading was experienced in their own lives. And patient-practitioner interaction is going into its 7th edition this year. And so I want to thank Geneva Johnson one more time for being the instigator of this powerful, powerful message that was so beautifully framed this morning in this Geneva Johnson Forum. Thank you. One more thing.
Yes, one more thing. We'll see you back at 10:30.